Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar news update video. So just going to focus in on this one here. It's more news about the AAA Avatar game that was announced over the last couple of days. So today saw the release of the podcast episode that featured the kind of update on this game. We heard most of the details about this because people got to listen to the audio version of this earlier. But on the audio version, they mentioned that there was this piece of basically mock-up concept art for the game that apparently we were going to get to see. So now I'm recording this shortly after the premiere for that video podcast has ended, and as you can see here, we do have the concept art for the AAA Avatar game. Otherwise, there was no extra kind of information here. If you've listened to the podcast at this point, you know what was said. I'll go over some of the information as we'll go through it, but I will, first of all, just go over this image. Now, as ever with Avatar these days, these reveals don't seem to go super smoothly for them. They seem to have some sort of a weird thing where they initially had one video version of this, but then they altered it last minute, and so the link for the premiere changed. But then when the live version, which was premiering, so you have to watch it live to get to the information on the game, went up, if you looked on their channel, they also put up just the full podcast as a video. And so you were able to just at the start basically go in and scroll through it. But interestingly, they showed some different stuff. The way they actually showed off the image was different. So they actually just showed this kind of scrolling image, same piece of concept art, but they actually put the title, Avatar Ice Wars, on it. Now, remember, this is a working title. That's what's said on the podcast about this. Its working title is Ice Wars. I'm guessing they didn't want to show this one publicly to not overly give the impression that the game is for sure locked in as being called Ice Wars. It probably is just a kind of codename thing to a certain degree. It kind of works, but you probably want it to be something a little bit different. So I can sort of see why maybe they decided against putting this one out there, especially because I don't think it actually on the image says like working title or anything like that. So just to not give the wrong impression, they didn't want to do that, but I was quick. I have the screenshot here, as you can see. But anyway, what they eventually did was on the community post, like I showed you, they did post this. This is what they showed on the actual live version of the podcast that they premiered. So you can see here, it's clearly listed as concept art, as in this game is roughly scheduled to come out 2027, 2028, and they're not even sure that that is a good estimate. So of course, they don't want you to overly lock in that when the final game comes out, it doesn't look like this. It's obviously a piece of concept art. It's by Bryan, one of the creators of Avatar, of course, and it's very, very cool. So let's take a look at this. So of course, the concept for this game is Ice Wars. The idea is that there's this natural disaster where volcano, or in this case volcanoes, erupt and basically threaten to plunge the world into an ice age, and you as the new Avatar have to try and stop this. It's set 7,000 years ago from Korra, so this is basically like 3,000 years after Avatar 1. It's a pretty wide open, like almost completely wide open part of the timeline where we know nothing that happens in or around this timeline, basically. So very little details on what like could be the happening here necessarily. It's not even overly clear where exactly we are, because this seems to be like a mega natural disaster. So can you even say for sure that like, oh, well, volcanoes in the Avatar world, the fire islands, that's where most of the volcanic stuff happens. But it's not the only place where it happens, because of course Aang fights a volcano in the Earth Kingdom. So this can happen kind of anywhere to a certain degree. Ice Wars maybe gives the impression that maybe something like this happens more in or around water tribes, but it's hard to say, because this image that we're seeing here, clearly there is snow in amongst the kind of lava of the volcanoes and stuff like that. But is this as a result of the Ice Age, or are we actually in a location that was already icy? It's kind of hard to tell. But of course, one of the interesting things that you can say as we zoom in here is that clearly a bunch of waterbenders here. You can probably see this a little bit clearer if you kind of zoom out, that's what it is meant to be. The resolution on this image, even the one that they posted, is not fantastic. I'm assuming they might post a clearer shot of this maybe on Instagram at some point. But you can clearly see a lot of water tentacles coming up. So this is a group of waterbenders defending, I guess, against the Avatar. Maybe highlighting that the villains in this game are going to be the water tribes, because I guess the water tribes would be the ones maybe able to take advantage of the world being plunged into an ice age, given that they can, manipulate ice and stuff like that. They're used to living in a climate like this, so it's their opportunity to maybe take a big advantage. And we're so far in the past, you have to completely remove from your head the idea of the Fire Nation are like the bad guys of the franchise, because that's really only the 100-Year War era, with some setup from the previous eras, of course. But, in this era, the Fire Nation is likely not formed. It's pretty much almost confirmed to be not like formed as a proper nation yet. It's just Fire Islands. So this is, you would probably say, if this avatar, as we suspect here, is a fire avatar, they are less a Fire Nation avatar, as more just representing fire bending in the cycle, as that being their kind of home placement on the avatar cycle. But it's a cool contrast here, like fire versus water, but this time it seems to be potentially the water tribe as the bad guys, which is kind of interesting. And yeah, with the avatar, you can see definitely like reds, reminiscent of some of the older style Fire Nation army kind of uniforms that we've seen, especially along the top. But then you can sort of see like the kind of wrist wraps kind of here, and some of the stuff around the belt gives the impression of like either this is this avatar representing some of the other cultures they've been through to become, the avatar, or this is a kind of unique style of the fire element people at this point in time. Of course, you can see there's sort of more water tribe style boots here, but that's more just snow kind of attire here. Notably, I suppose the top knot is quite kind of interesting. That's very Fire Nation culture, but there's not too much to read into here, in the same way that it's unclear, because we know there's going to be some level of like create your own character customization in the game, but they never quite said that like full on the avatar is a customizable character. You play as the avatar, but you also play as companions of the avatar, but apparently you're able to create your own character. I suppose when it comes to the avatar in this game, the only real thing they need to like probably lock in to make it like make sense canonically is the home nation, because where they are in the avatar cycle sets where that avatar is, where their era is compared to everything else. So it would be weird if you can change the avatar's kind of point in the cycle. That messes up the timeline, because it's going to be different for every person. So I don't know, like they can make this work. Like if you play as, whatever gender you choose the avatar to be, depending on like how significant the story is, if this is just an avatar who solves this crisis, you can make a lot of elements of what this character is super, super flexible once you keep some of the stuff that really sets the era correct. And you can have a lot of the more set characters be elsewhere. But again, it's super unclear. It's super early. We don't really know the full situation here. So that's that. And then probably the only other thing to talk about here is this animal here. Now, I say animal rather than just immediately going dragon, because to me, this does not look like a typical Avatar dragon. Mainly from the perspective of like the tail. This seems more like a kind of a cat tail. Almost like a cat or kind of monkey tail, rather than a dragon tail, which in Avatar, dragons have kind of more of a kind of lizardy type tail, whereas this seems more like a kind of fur covered tail almost. And just in general, it doesn't seem as like big. Maybe this is just what a kind of young dragon looks like. Certainly the wings give you that effect, but I don't know if it's just the drawing here of maybe the importance is not necessarily the animal in this scene. Is it trying to get across that it's a different animal or what? But that's one of the ways you can make the world unique, is have animals that are very different, because we're at a much earlier point in the timeline. So maybe this isn't a dragon. Maybe this is some sort of a I don't know, griffin-like kind of thing. Because again, we have hybrid animals in Avatar. This could be a very weird hybrid animal that's like a cat dragon or something like that. But at the very least, I hesitate to say full-on dragon in the way that we know dragons in Avatar. And I assume they want to make that kind of quite unique. So, very cool. The one thing you'd maybe kind of slightly maybe worry about with the game, though, is because of the ice theme. Like, will the game be too icy, too snowy in all locations? Like, you get to explore Ba Sing Se, but if the place is covered in snow, how does the Earth Kingdom look that different from, you know, being in a Water Tribe city? Of course, they're going to look different, but, you know, you just wonder about the kind of visual aesthetic overall. So the hope here is probably that you're stopping stuff like that from happening, and rather that stuff hasn't happened yet. So that maybe this here is an icy region somewhere in the Water Tribes that is like this in the first place, and that maybe what we get to see here is in the aftermath of this, we truly see like the formation of maybe like the Northern Water Tribe as we know it. Maybe something in or around this situation causes the formation of the Southern Water Tribe, perhaps. But, you know, interesting stuff, because you can see there's another volcano in the background here as well. Obviously, it's concept art. I doubt Bryan was overly thinking about where exactly in the Avatar world am I placing this drawing, and more getting across just the idea of Avatar potentially fighting against waterbenders as the main villains. Volcano erupting is the main idea of kind of what's happening in this game. Snowy landscapes, lots of ice kind of covering, you know, this otherwise rocky kind of mountain, and some interesting stuff like clearly much older style clothing than what you would expect from a fire bender kind of character from most of the eras we're familiar with, and a potentially different looking dragon-like animal, just to get across that it's not exactly the world as we know it, but it's definitely Avatar. And the reason I'm spending so much time on this is just because this is huge. Like, we technically have like a piece of art like this for like the Aang movie that's coming out in 2026, but because we know those characters so well, and it's just the AAA era just a little bit moved on, other than just analyzing the adult designs for like Team Avatar, there's not a ton to talk about, even though it is exciting. Whereas this is like our first ever glimpse into a full-on section of the timeline. That like the whole history of the Avatar is 10,000 years. Here we are at like the start-ish of like the second quarter of that overall timeline, where like we have Wan at the beginning, Korra at the end. Here's this section like just here where we're, you know, probably like 30 something avatars in at this point. So the Avatar has been around for quite a while, but we're pre Four Nations. And what I mean by that is it's not necessarily pre none of the nations have formed. It's just pre the set being exactly as we know them to be. So likely the Fire Nation is not the Fire Nation, it is Fire Islands that are feuding to a certain degree. Lots of different stuff going on there. Likely, maybe we only have a Northern Water Tribe at this point in time. Maybe it's not even necessarily called that or something like that. The Earth Kingdom isn't necessarily a full-on kingdom, like that much land during this point in time. Is it connected in the same way we think it is, or is it more a bunch of separate kingdoms, which will later go on to kind of come together? We probably expect the Air Nomads, in a way, regardless of era, to be effectively the same outside of like small differences. Like one thing we know ends up happening with the Air Nomads would be that they eventually have to settle in for air temples. I don't think we know exactly when those temples get sort of like built or founded, and when each one specifically kind of comes about. We also need to see like where they really make their connection with sky bisons, and that becomes a huge part of them. And then their tattoos kind of evolve from what we saw in beginnings to being the arrow markings of the sky bisons. So there's some subtle evolutions that have to happen on the air nomad side of things, but they're probably the nation that stays the most consistent throughout everything. Whereas the other three nations are going to be like very different, I'm assuming, in this. Which is just interesting by itself. Like, there's very much the capacity here for there to be like groups from like effectively the same like nation of like same bending, but they're a completely different like organized in different ways. That sort of idea. But otherwise I would say just, in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this image. What do you make of what's going on here? Do you have any sense for where in the Avatar world this location is? Your thoughts on potentially a fire avatar and how exactly the customization aspects of this game are going to work? Are we going to get to customize the avatar, or will that be like the companion is our player character and they're just not showing that here? Potentially water tribe villains, potentially, with Ice Wars being the thing. And then also our dragon thing that doesn't quite look like a dragon. What are your thoughts there? But otherwise, yes, that's been the news. Let me know in the comments what you think, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.